Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of September 16th. And those people who have been paying close attention to the show know that we had on a fellow named Peter Hudis a couple weeks ago. And he was talking about a wonderful event that took place at WLUW. It was the national tour of Ukrainian and Russian anti-war activists opposed to Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. And Dan Kugler, who is a longtime friend of this show, he's worked as a host, an engineer, etc. I know he's Ukrainian. I don't think he's from Ukraine more recently, but he was going to the event too. And I asked him to come on today and give us a little report about how it went, and then talk a little bit about what's going on in Ukrainian community here in Chicago, and even what he knows because he's got family back there. And he's going to do that, but he also brought on a fellow we're introducing too, is Daniil Cherkasskiy. And he's involved with a group called here in Chicago called Ukraine Trustchain. So we're going to talk Ukraine for the next 20, 25 minutes. And Dan Kugler, how about filling us in a little bit on the event at Loyola University, resisting Russian imperialism?
Yeah, it was, Michael, it's good to see you and to be back involved with the show. So it's great. Now we're doing Zoom.
Makes it easy.
Yeah, it does. So it was a fantastic event. It was the Ukraine Solidarity Network. And I encourage people to go online, Facebook, and they have a webpage. It's a recently organized organization, essentially by leftists in America and Ukraine to kind of counter some of the silence on the left and sometimes opposition to aid for Ukraine. And I think they spoke well at the event to some of the misconceptions about the war. It's a lot of people want to look at it as a proxy war with NATO, and there's some issues to be looked at with NATO, but if you look at the situation really within Russia and Ukraine, you see an increasingly right-wing repressive government in Russia that's using war rhetoric to justify its power at this point and justify suppression of its people. So it was a powerful talk. There was two speakers, Hanna Perechoda, who was from Donetsk, and she's in France now, but she spoke about just the horrors of the war and the invasion, and it's not right now. It's in Ukraine. The situation is not about having a perfect leftist or centrist or any sort of feelings about the invasion. It's the fact that there's an invasion going on by a repressive government and against Ukraine, and that there's no internal disagreement in Ukraine's left about what to do. It's a different situation in America. I think the further you get from Eastern Europe, the more divergent the views on the left become. But Ilya Budrakatis also spoke very eloquently. He actually left Russia a week after the invasion of Ukraine. He was an anti-war activist and writer, and we're having dinner afterwards. He just pointed at his backpack and said, "I packed this bag and I left the country." So it's they're having a difficult situation over there too.
Dan, let me just ask you before we go on to the other Daniel, what do you hear from your relatives in Ukraine? And I know you visited there in the last few years, took a lot of pictures. You used to be putting them up on Instagram all the time. I kept saying, I better get my pictures from Ukraine scanned. I still want to do that.
We
But
should
tell
do
us what you got.
a dual book or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I last went there in 2020, so it was before COVID, before the recent invasion. You know, if you look at it factually, the invasion first started in 2014, of course. But you know, I think at that time, and I spoke to people. My family lives in Kiev and the surrounding villages mostly, and they were aware of the war, but it hadn't really touched daily life unless you had someone in the service or you had family from Eastern Ukraine. But since 2022, they don't sleep at night. There's air raid sirens going on, and every few days, something people get bombed and killed. It's a really intense situation. But they're resolved. A lot of my family members get together and pack food to send, to the troops, and just they're in it for the long haul. They'll be tough, but they really feel, confident that they should, go get through this and defend their country.
Well, Dan, one of the things I wanted you to do was talk about what was going on here in Chicago with the Ukrainian community. And you suggested we bring on our new friend, Daniil Cherkasskiy, and here he is. And he has an organization that's been doing a lot of serious work helping out the situation over there. His group is called Ukraine Trustchain. So hello to you there, Daniil.
Hello, great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and about your response and how you created this organization and what it does.
Sure. So I myself was born in Kyiv and left Ukraine about 25 years ago, right after school, and lived a normal immigrant life in the U.S., not thinking a lot about the place where I grew up. Right, it was like for many immigrants, it was an important part of my childhood, but not something I thought about deeply. Right, and long story short, that changed when the invasion happened. Somehow, like with many other people who immigrated from Ukraine or from other former Soviet Union countries, felt personally violated and insulted by this invasion, by this colonial war, and the picture seemed to be so clear who is right and who is wrong, that we all looked for ways to contribute directly. And given that I had connections within Ukraine, had friends, had people that I trusted, we figured out a way to build our help for Ukraine so that people that want to get involved with a humanitarian relief effort feel that they actually make direct impact on the ground. So in the very first days when we were just trying to figure out what to do, we found through a number of stories that just were accumulating very quickly in the first days of the war. We found that there is a whole class, a whole group of people within Ukraine who just dropped everything they were doing and started volunteering. For example, the initial people that were helping were looking for elderly who were trapped after a stroke or heart attacks at home. Their family flees the city in panic, and somebody needed to bring them food, bring them medication while the city was being shelled. And the amazing thing was that there is a whole community that was present in Ukraine prior to this moment that I didn't know about, that really opened up and stood up in the very first days. And I was fortunate enough to come into contact with those people. And many of them is somebody that I had mutual friends with, people that I was connected to through immigrant community. And it was very clear that these were the people that I trusted, just like I trust people that I grew up with, right? I understand their background, I understand where they went to school. And at the same time, I was integrated into community here. And I think people know where I work, where my kids go to school. And so it was easy for me to convince people that this was a worthy effort. And especially in the very first days of the war, the cost of human life was just, unfortunately, very low. For like $3 to $4 a person, you could save hundreds of people. There were buses that didn't have fuel. You sent $500 over, and 100 people, children, elderly, women, were able to make their way out of bombardment zones. But we kept going, and because thanks to the compassion and to kind of just general support in Western society for Ukrainian people, people continue to donate. And as we provided sustained funding to this group of volunteers, these volunteers themselves have been able to plan, build organizations, and so forth. And so right now, we just continue to fundraise and support this network of people who do humanitarian work within Ukraine, which I think is very effective. And because we're professionals working in the US, we do not spend anything on administrative costs, and just make sure that every cent that we receive goes to the people who know exactly what to do within Ukraine. So that's kind of the story in a nutshell. Yeah.
Well, that's really good. How did you develop, it was through your friendship and I'm sure other ways, this network in Ukraine that's doing the actual delivery of the goods, whether that be helping people to get out or to fuel a bus or to provide food. I guess what I'm sensing is that what you're doing here in the States is raising money, and we could get to that, how people could help on that. But then you got a number of contacts over there who are doing the work on the ground. Tell us a little bit how you established that and who those contacts might be.
Yep. So in the very first days of the war, it was very easy to spot people. Basically, when millions of people are fleeing west, there were a few people moving east, right? They're moving into the danger areas with cars, with aid. It just takes, I'm afraid I'm not exactly the type of person that would have had the guts to do it in the first couple of weeks when it was completely uncertain what was going to happen next. And the way we developed it at first was, well, there were some random events. For example, like there were a couple of things that just happened. My friend, for example, had two babies, twins that were born in Kiev, and he was in Chicago, and he was trying to find food to get to those babies. And I remember we wrote about this on social networks, just looking for any ways to do it. And all of a sudden, a person shows up in the comments and says, I will go. And we start getting voice memos from her. She's like, oh, expletive deleted. They just shelled this pharmacy, so I'm going to go to another one to see that, and once you live through a couple of hours of that, and at that point, we didn't really send any money. It was just like, and immediately a trust was established. But as these people keep working, they tell you that, okay, my friend who's doing the same thing in Kharkiv needs money for fuel. We establish a connection then, and we then grow a conversation there. So there were a couple of events like this, and then we organically grew it. And this community is connected. Everybody does the same thing. Resources are shared. There is no copyright in the volunteer movement. People just freely share ideas and figure out the most efficient way to help. And so after a couple of uncertain weeks, you just see the context, and everybody is going to roughly the same places. When it's Bakhmut, people are trying to get as close to Bakhmut as possible. Right now, there is attack on Kupiansk. There are volunteers that push aid into Kupiansk. When there was a flood in Kherson, for weeks, there were the same people there. They're all going to help after, with various flood relief sites in Kherson. So even though it seems far away, after spending, like we do, tens of hours a week on this, you just know the context, and you know exactly the little events that happen everywhere, and you get a pretty clear sight on things that you can check from many different contexts you have and kind of triangulate the overall situation there.
What I got from some information that was sent to me, I think Dan sent it. He said that Ukraine Trustchain has been involved in evacuating more than 50,000 people from dangerous parts of Ukraine, and more than 1.5 million people have gotten aid deliveries through hundreds of projects, whether it be running shelters, rebuilding roofs, etc. You want to elaborate a little bit on that and how you are moving people, or what you hear from the groups on the ground that you're working with are doing it?
Yep. Yeah, it is correct. Where evacuation number, among many other things we do, is at 54,000. It's just not something that you can manage, right? What happens is that there are these really motivated, selfless individuals who are doing all this heroic work, and we support them. Money that we raise is just enables them to kind of maximize the effects of their work. So some teams are they happen to have vehicles, and so for months on, they are running evacuation routes where the bus comes into the city, people board the bus, and they leave. And it reached its peak in the middle of last year, but it is still going on right now. There are a couple of hundred people that need to be evacuated weekly from active battle zones in the east, because even though the war seems stable, the front line keeps moving and different places get hit. So evacuation works that way. And then a lot of people choose to provide support, to load trucks with supplies, go into areas that are hard to access, with items that are very hard to predict. That's where that's when we were thinking about this, assembling humanitarian aid and shipping it in while it's still relevant, it's very difficult. On some days, there is enough pasta and bread, but people do not have enough sanitary pads or toothpaste. And it's just something that has to happen in the moment. So we do not tell volunteer teams what to do. We focus on trust and building a relationship with them and understanding why they're doing what they're doing, which informs our next steps and where to grow.
Just for the people who are listening who are less familiar, what are some of the dangers that the evacuators and the evacuees face? If you could describe some situations.
Yeah. I wouldn't claim to have firsthand experience, but it is a part of the reality. So I just want to make sure that I highlight that I'm just talking about someone else's experience. It is something that people don't think about, is that artillery has gotten a lot more powerful than it was during World War II. It's people sometimes tend to think that if an artillery shell doesn't hit a person directly, that that person is fine. But in reality, there is a 150 feet kill radius for these shells, right? So if you're in that circle, you get injured or killed. And so people that evacuate go into the areas that get hit daily. So and it's an artillery shell. You have 5 to 7 seconds before the shell hits you. So the danger of this, people go into this uncertain situation where the enemy has really good optics, uses drones, and so forth. So there is a constant risk assessment, constant dangers of doing this. Like just a couple of days ago, we heard about a volunteer group being killed. Fortunately, the groups that we work with take risk very seriously, and when the area is too dangerous, they make sure that they do not gather people, that they don't have more than one vehicle, more than 100 meters apart. There are all kinds of safety rules that they follow in order to minimize risk. And fortunately, nobody we work with directly had, sustained serious damage to date. But it's also important to know that there are forces on the ground that are working against Ukrainians. There are agents of the Russian state who are interested in hunting down and, interested in situation deteriorating from a humanitarian perspective. So volunteers, unfortunately, are fair game at this point as far as the Russian military is concerned. And so it is a constant factor for volunteers operating in gray zones next to the front line.
Daniil Cherkasskiy, let me ask you, we're going to run out of time, but I know that you have a newsletter that people could get, and I'm going to just tell it right now. I believe it's www.Ukraine Trustchain, one word, .org/newsletter. And you're also on other social media platforms. And for those people who are listening to the show on Saturday morning or got it on YouTube the night before, you, I think, are having an event later today. That would be Saturday the 16th. How about giving me the okay on the directions for the newsletter, and tell us about your event?
Yep. Thank you so much for mentioning this. Yes, UkraineTrustchain.org is the website where you can support us and follow our updates. In many ways, spreading the word about the work that the volunteers do is more important, because the more people know about it, the more people connect to this mission and find it in their heart to support this. We have a very special event this Saturday where one of the volunteer leaders who was involved in evacuations and supports refugee population across Ukraine is actually for the first time coming to Chicago for a week. And we are organizing a meeting with her in Glenview, Illinois. The address is going to be 976 Harlem Avenue. It is at 11 a.m. So pretty soon, based on the time that you're listening to this podcast. And it is going to be at Smetana Restaurant in Glenview. Once again, the address is 976 Harlem Avenue. If you subscribe, we hope to have more events like this coming up in the next few weeks as we get ready for the winter, and have some of the leaders travel here to discuss the next plans.
Well, we'll be glad to promote that a little bit when you keep us abreast of what's going on. And I would like to ask both of you to give us a short going out on the spirit of the people you're in touch with. Are people optimistic? Are they in an enduring mode? Are people getting down? I mean, this is pretty heavy, serious stuff, been going on for quite a while now. And, it seems pretty heroic to me, but I just wonder what you sense from your people you're in touch with.
Yeah, I'm happy to be the first in this. My sense is this: people who are involved day to day, first, it's clear that who is right and who is wrong here, right? Ukrainians are fighting to protect their children and their parents, and exist in society that welcomes different opinions and so on. So they are not optimistic that the war will end very soon. But they know exactly what to do tomorrow and next week and 2 weeks from now. I think that's the mode that we're all in. We know exactly what to do next. We're not sure how long we will need to be doing this for. That's where we are right now.
Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. And I want to thank the two Dans. That's Daniil Cherkasskiy and Dan Kugler. Dan, I assume you'll be back on show soon. You've been helping out again. And Daniil Cherkasskiy, I hope to meet you in person. And you're doing great work. Keep it up.
Thank you.